Hello and welcome to Rock Your Block. I'm Tia Young and we have a fantastic show for you today. We're actually on part 2 of the series, our 9/11 special for you. And we have Ms. Sharyn Alvarez, who was with us recently talking about the tragic death of her sister, her baby sister, Felicia Dunn Jones, who died as a result of the 9/11 tragic. Sharyn, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much for coming back and continuing to share with us.
Thank you for
During our
having me.
last segment, we touched upon a number of issues and we really didn't get to complete some of the more important ones that I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
During our last discussion, we were talking about what Felicia actually died of. She actually died 5 months after the tragic event with Twin Towers. Felicia died from something that the doctors, for lack of a better word, because they really didn't know what caused it, because they never had anything like this to happen before, but they labeled it sarcoidosis. And Sharyn, I'm going to ask you if you would kind of go back over and give us a highlight of what sarcoidosis is and maybe give us some signs and symptoms. And she was kind enough to share this document with me, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
They call the dust. They call it the dust. That's what it's what's
Just
being
the
called.
dust.
The
That's what
dust.
it's, the
You know,
dust.
because of the buildings when they collapsed. When you think about everything that the World Trade Center was made of, the airplanes, the people,
Right.
the fuel. When you look at a building, you think about carpet and telephones and copy machines.
Right.
All of that ground and just
building,
became
yeah.
a toxic dust.
Wow.
At the time when she first died, for lack of a better word, they diagnosed it as sarcoidosis because of the types of symptoms that she had. She had these tiny granulomas. They're microscopic because they did a toxicology. They couldn't see anything there. So they did a microscopic exam of all of her organs. And they found these granulomas. Very, very sand-like. That's what they call them, granulomas.
All over her body or just located?
Her organs. The
In her organs.
They,
In
yeah,
all of
they
her
took
organs.
samples of her organs, and,
Wow.
and they said they were in all of her organs.
Oh.
The actual cause was the sarcoidosis, the granulomas that developed in her heart. It caused a sudden cardiac death.
Okay, okay. And so what were the symptoms? I mean, it was 5 months almost from the day of 9/11 when Felicia passed. So over that 5-month period, were there symptoms?
I wasn't aware that there were symptoms, and she lives in New York, I live in Virginia.
Right.
But I found out that she did have shortness of breath, that there was a hacking cough, which that's a sign that a lot of the people who suffer from the dust, this hacking cough, because let's face it, when we breathe, everything comes into our lungs.
Right.
Skin lesions. But then eventually,
Had she started getting skin lesions?
no, my brother-in-law just said she had one on her chest,
Oh,
just one.
Okay.
So, but you know, they put cream on it.
Right.
You know, you take care of yourself with a lot of things.
You just think it's just a little bump
Right,
or an insect
and
bite.
part of the issues that they were having, there was so much going on in those days that there was so many people, you know, who were ill. They were encouraging people to, you know, not clog up the medical system.
Right.
You know, if it's not emergency, you know, see what you can do to take care of it yourself. She never was under medical care for anything. She died, and that's when we found this all out after she died.
Right. And did it take them a while to discover?
Well, like I said, the autopsy took 3 months before we got the results, and they said that it was, you know, sarcoidosis with cardiac involvement. By that time, my brother-in-law had a lawyer that he was working with, and who had other clients too. There were, you know, a lot of people were coming down with this cough, and as in further investigation, they got her medical records. They shared them with 2 specialists. They looked them over, and they came to the conclusion after talking to her medical doctors, who stated that she was in good health, there was nothing wrong with her,
Right.
that she succumbed to the dust.
Wow. That is just amazing. Well, you mentioned about lawyers, and I'm wondering, were you ever involved with the lawyers or with the 9/11 Commission?
No, my sister was married, so her husband was her next of kin. And
Okay,
when
so
a
he's the one
person's
that
married, the spouse is the one that manages those things. My sister's supervisor recommended a lawyer to my brother-in-law, and they, when they worked together to see about the 9/11 compensation fund, then they looked at this situation, they looked at her, the autopsy reports. They knew about other people who were suffering from similar types of symptoms, and they did further investigation. I attended hearings.
You did? Okay.
Yes, I did attend hearings that were held with the 9/11 fund. Later on, there were congressional hearings.
I was going to ask you, were there
Yes,
congressional hearings?
they were congressional
Were they held
hearings.
here or in New
Washington,
York? They were held in
D.C.
Washington.
In Washington, D.C., Hillary Clinton was sponsoring hearings so that, there could be help for people in New York. So I attended hearings here on Capitol Hill.
Right. Well, Sharyn, I want to get to the children. I want to know how the children are doing. But before we do that, here's an article from the New York Times with Felicia's picture on it. I don't know if the cameras can zoom in on that or not, but tell us about this article.
This was the day that the New York Times put out an article. It was May 24th, 2007. She died in 2002. 9/11 happened in 2001. It was May 24th in 2002 when the New York City Medical Examiner stated that for the first time that a death was linked to the exposure from the dust, from the destruction of the World Trade Center, and that my sister was now going to be considered an official victim of 9/11.
Right, so that kind of opened or paved the way for others that maybe had been diagnosed with the same.
Sure, I'm not sure.
You're not sure,
yeah,
but it
what
have.
happened after that.
Right.
But yes, that did open the door for others who, especially for a lot of the first responders who by 2007 were suffering from effects of the dust.
Was your mother still alive to see this?
Yeah, she was.
That's good.
Yeah, she
That's
was.
good because she was able to see some results.
Yeah, we got that.
happening.
What happened was when this happened, they weren't notified. My brother-in-law had been out with the kids, and when he came home, the media was in front of the house.
Wow.
So that was my niece and nephew. They were really. My niece called me on the phone. I just told her stay in the car and let your father handle it. And then I, jumped in the car and went up to New York the next day because I figure, my mother might need support.
Right. Well, Sharyn, let's talk a little bit about Joseph and Rebecca. What ages were they when this happened, and what are they doing now?
Joseph was 14. He had turned 14 in January. My sister died in February. Rebecca was 9. She turned 10 that April. And Joseph has a developmental disability, so he was going to a special school, and he continued to go to that school till he was 21. He's in a program now where he, has a job, and he gets picked up in the morning, and he goes to work, and then he comes home in the afternoon. Rebecca is fine. She was in the 4th grade at the time, so it was difficult for her because she understood more in a different way from Joseph. Joseph understood, but his ability to understand things is different from ours.
Yeah.
He knows what happens. He understands what it means, and it has impacted him, but not to the depth that it has the rest of us.
Right.
In Rebecca's case, over the years, because she's 20 now, so it's been 10 years, so she had half her life with her mother and now half her life without her mother.
Right.
It's been difficult for her.
How did you step in? Because I know you're a
Well,
good aunt.
we were close. My sister and I were always close, and I was close to her kids, and she was close to my children. So we were close. Rebecca and Joseph knew who I was, before this happened. So I just spent more time with them. The first 2 years after my sister died, I went to New York every other week.
I remember that.
And,
I do remember that. Yeah.
My mother had moved there so she could be closer to them. I made sure she had everything she needed, did the heavy lifting.
Right.
And then, I would pick them up. We would go to White Castle and get hamburgers. And then I instituted this family game night, but we used board games, no electronic games. So we got out the Scrabble and the Monopoly and the Yahtzee, and we would all play. My mother, the kids, and I would play board games. And we'd keep an eye out for Joseph because he's really good at board games, And Rebecca would get mad because she could never beat all of us because she's the youngest one in the group.
One, yeah.
So we did that every other week. Then I would take them, to church on Sunday. Rebecca made her first communion. My sister had started that process, so we continued it until she made her first communion. And I would come for, school events.
Well, I remember years ago you were telling me that your actual family roots were in Puerto Rico, right?
My mother was born and raised in Puerto Rico. My father's from North Carolina.
Did you take a trip to Puerto Rico and with Rebecca, or it seems like I remember you and Rebecca went somewhere and spent some time.
Well, what happened is, with the type of job that I have, I go to conferences a lot during the summer months. So whenever I would go to an employee organization conference, she would come with me during the summer.
Oh, that's good.
So I could expose her to, to those. So we'd have a chance to visit with each other and travel.
Right. Well, does she call you and seek out advice?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
That's
all
great.
the time, yeah.
Now, she's in college now.
She's in college now, her third year. She just started her third year of college.
That's fantastic. I really think that is commendable because they absolutely had their lives ripped apart, you might say. And for Joseph to be, gainfully employed and working and moving in his space,
his world,
in his world, and then to have Rebecca be strong enough to do well in high school and move on to college, and now she's almost out.
She had a lot of support. She, her father's side of the family, there were those who supported her there, as well as her father and I and my mother.
Right. And we haven't talked much about your children. You have 2 children, Lisa.
Yes, they're adults.
And so tell us a little bit about them. I know this was devastating for them as well.
Yeah, this impacted a lot of the nieces and nephews because my sister was, like I said, the baby in the family. So all of us were older than her. Our children were older than her children. She became an aunt when she was 13 years old, so she liked being an aunt. And she was younger, so, everybody thought she was hip, And then she was smart and good looking, but cool,
Right.
She wasn't like the parents.
Right.
So they were devastated. They were all pretty much in their 20s when she died. And for, a group of young people in their 20s, they just don't see someone as young as my sister dying. They probably thought, well, grandma, or, that type of thing, but not 42. So it really rocked them. It really did. And I think it impacted them all to the point where they did some serious thinking about their lives and what they were doing. And some of them made changes.
In their lives.
It changed the trajectory of their lives as well.
Well, Sharyn, we're going to take a short station break. And we're going to come back. We're going to talk more about grief. So we'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain-link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them. Why did we learn all this?
My mother,
my son, my sister-in-law were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can. Please join us.
Hi, welcome back to Rock Your Block. We're interviewing Ms. Sharyn Alvarez today, and this is our special 9/11 segment. Sharyn, I'd like to go back to the grief issue because we touched on that just a little bit during the first segment of the series. I know that sometimes when hard things happen, like death, that's a hard thing to most people. Sometimes everybody runs to maybe the husband or the spouse. And sometimes the mother, the father, the siblings are forgotten. Did you feel any of that during Felicia's
Yeah, I think with most of the people, I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of people felt that, siblings felt that way. You know, the people who died, if they were married, then there was the spouse and the children that were important. If they were single, then it was the mother and the father. And a lot of times, you're trying to help the children, you're trying to help the spouse, you're trying to help your mother and father, but as siblings, it was interesting, because even as I went through to the library to try to find, you know, books about grief, you could find it for if you were a widow or if you lost a child, but there wasn't anything written about how to handle your sibling. So yes, that was difficult. Trying to recognize my place in this situation was important, even though my sister was important to me. So, but I had good friends, and they were there for me. They really were. And you really know who your friends are. They were good friends before, and they remain good friends, and they helped me. My children, you know, were a comfort to me. But I was in the role of trying to help my mother cope, help my niece and nephew cope, help my children and the other nieces and nephews cope. So it was a difficult time.
So you were helping everybody, and I'm saying, who's helping Sharyn?
Well, my friends.
Your friends
my friends did. You know, I talked on the phone, because one thing I know from my experience is it's an unbelievable process to really wrap your head around. So you talk about it, and you find yourself talking about it over and over and over again. Maybe a little slant here or a slant there from something else that happened, but they were very patient.
That's good.
And they listened to me. They gave me that listening ear.
What about Miss Carmen, your mom? Do you think people were sensitive to her needs? And when I say this, I don't mean to be mean or say that people are mean. I just think sometimes folks just don't know what to do.
True.
I mean, they just don't know what to do, and sometimes when you don't know what to do, instead of facing it head on, you kind of back away, you know.
What happened with my mother, like I said, she went straight into anger mode, and I don't think she ever left it. And that made her harder for people to deal with, because she was so angry, and people couldn't deal with her anger.
Right.
They could not deal with, she felt that what happened was totally unfair, and she lashed out, and people had a hard time dealing with her anger. So they just walked away.
They just walked away from that.
And then she had, you know, and then there were others who, you know, she lived in a independent living environment, and there were, you know, women like her age who had similar experiences.
Oh, okay.
So they, you know, she had a couple of friends that could deal with it.
So I do remember back maybe about a year, maybe 2 years before your mom passed, myself and my sister and I came to New York with you one weekend, and we had a good time with Miss Carmen. And to me, it seemed as if New York was better for her. To me, she seemed happier in New York than she did here in Virginia.
In Virginia.
And I don't know if that was because, you know, you had to work and you were, you know, had to go out of town, and maybe she was here alone, and once in New York, she was back in her old stomping ground, and she knew her way around. I don't know, but I just got that feeling. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, what happened with my mother is she lived with me in North Carolina, and we lived there for about 13 years, and she was very comfortable there. She had a volunteer job where she translated for mothers and children who would go to the clinic at the hospital and couldn't speak English. She translated between English and Spanish.
This is Spanish.
So when we moved to Virginia, there was like this totally new environment, and I guess she liked the North Carolina, she liked New York. I don't think she was up to starting over again.
Right.
So I think that was the issue with Virginia. And then once I moved there, I was traveling a lot more.
Right.
So when she moved to New York, she was back to the whole stomping ground, so to speak. She had been in Staten Island on and off with my sister.
Right.
And she liked having her own place. I think she thought she was cramping my style.
Oh.
But it was really interesting. I had a lot of people who were upset with me when I told them my mother was moving back to New York. They all wanted to know, what did I do?
Oh.
And I'm like, what do you mean, what did I do? We said, well, all these years she's living with you. Why is she leaving? What did you do to her? Because a lot of people liked my mother.
Yeah.
She would travel with me too sometimes. But I told them, no, she just wanted to be independent. And
I liked her.
They couldn't see me allowing her to do that. And I'm like, you don't not allow my mother to do anything. My mother does what she wants to do. And besides, I always felt that people do that with elderly people and children. They cuddle them. And to me, I felt like my role was to help her be whatever it is she wanted to be.
Right. I loved your mother because, first of all, she was no nonsense, and I like no nonsense people. But she also had a very kind heart and history. I just love coming over to your house and having her go back over the years, and she could go all the way back to 100 years ago, telling the history of the family. And I always found that so very interesting, of how she related to people. You talked about going into bookstores and not being able to find materials that would give any guidance on siblings, about the grieving process. What did you do? Because you seem to have moved from point A. I'm not going to say, because I know with myself and the death of my brother, it's something that you never really get over.
No.
I mean, you never forget about it. But you do find something deep down to move forward. How did you move forward? There may be some people out there
I think
that...
my focus was working with my mother and helping my niece and nephew. That was my focus. I think if you can find something to focus on, that will help you. So
And
wanting
you have hobbies?
to be, I do have hobbies, but believe it or not, I couldn't do a lot of those types of things. The books that I read, the types of books I read, I don't read the same books anymore. I didn't listen to music or watch TV for about a year.
Really?
I really was grief-stricken.
I didn't know
All of
that.
those types of things seem frivolous. So I tried to stay focused on what I could do to help the kids. Why did this happen to my sister?
Right.
What can I do to help my mother? And I had to go to work, so I had to get myself together to go to work.
Did your outlook change? It seems like your outlook...
definitely.
Your outlook changed.
My outlook did change. I was always a serious person, and I think I became more serious. I felt that you really do have to count for something in this world, and my sister was really big about that. One thing that impressed me about her was I talked to her supervisor several times, and one of the first conversations I had with her supervisor was that when she told my sister's clients, because she was a civil rights investigator for the Department of Education, so she worked with parents in schools, that they cried.
Wow.
My sister was a federal government employee, so people pick on us a lot. And to have somebody say that they cried because a federal government employee died and that they weren't related to them, that impressed me. My sister.
So she had been impacting the lives
of
folks.
She liked to mediate problems and try to find a win-win, situation for people.
Yeah.
So later on, I actually, and it's interesting because now I worked in civil rights, now I work in outreach and advocacy, and I work with employees, with mainly women. I work with what's called special emphasis programs, and I work with people trying to help them help others.
Right.
So for me, focusing on my niece and my nephew, helping them out, focusing on my mother, trying to make her as comfortable as possible, trying to come up with things to do that would be interesting, that might make her smile, is what I focused on.
So now, what do you do for Sharyn?
I'm still helping everybody out, because once you get into that mode, that's what you do. I've had my hobbies. My hobbies are very important. I think people need to have hobbies.
Needlework is certainly one of them.
Yeah, this is my attempt at quilting. It's not my main focus is crocheting. I have a hook rug my mother did not complete.
Okay.
It was halfway done. So I'm working on that now.
You're working on that. And what about, you mentioned earlier, you touched on it about journaling. How did you find that to be a source of comfort?
It is helpful for people, especially if you just don't feel like counseling. Sometimes, for me, I didn't think I could find anybody that could really understand what I was saying.
Yeah.
And that's probably arrogant on my part. but I just,
But you
that's how I felt. So I kept a journal. I used to have a journal when I was a kid. You know, when I was a kid, it was, you know, Dear Diary. So I had lots of diaries when I was a kid and had to hide them from my siblings. But as an adult, I kept them too from time to time. And I noticed in times of trouble, I lean towards journaling.
Journaling.
So I just write down, you know, how I feel and what I think.
Well, you know, I tried to, when my brother first passed, I went out and I bought a journal. And it's been by my bed now since January, and I haven't been able to put much in it other than just my name and his name. So I guess it's something that just, you know, one night or day or something, I'll pick it up and start writing in it.
Start thinking about his history.
Right.
Because I started doing that. And sometimes maybe the writing process may not be good since we're all into technology, maybe computers will work. But I started writing my mother's life story.
I was going to ask you, you know, have you thought about writing Felicia's story?
I've done that. I have 3 books, the Book of Carmen, the Book of Felicia, and the Book of Sharyn. And
Okay.
every once in a while I'll go in there and just type something.
Okay, so you do have that set up.
But it's all
That's
on
good.
computer. It's all on the computer. In the beginning, I did have a journal that I hand wrote. But now, my mother told me a lot of stories, like you said, history. So I'm writing her story based on the stories she told me. So basically, I'm just writing the stories that she told me about everyone.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
But there again, knowing when the end is the problem.
Right.
Since I've been doing this for 10 years.
That's right, right.
So I've got I keep coming up with more stories that I remember. So I get up on a Saturday morning and type them up.
Well, Sharyn, we almost have to end. We have probably about a minute or so to go. And I know that we are going to show Felicia's story in photographs as we close. But what advice would you give to anyone who is going through a grieving process and it just seems like they can't pull out of it? I know that there are some people, like you say, who are just not comfortable going to a counselor. So can you kind of sum up what, in your perspective?
It may take several years to move through the grieving process. So take your time, take care of yourself, see your doctors. If you're on medication, make sure you're taking your medication and taking care of yourself. If you have elderly people in your family, you really need to look out for them. If you have young people in the family, teenagers, children, because they grieve too. So take that time to do what you can to help them and get the help that you need. You can read books. There are a lot of online processes now that you can go through to have online chats, support groups. You don't have to do this alone. Know that it's going to take time. You won't get your life back, but you eventually will move on to a new reality.
Sharyn, thank you so much. That's very good advice. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.